Okay, south of normal. All right.
Do I have ADD? No, that's not a thing. ADD is no longer a recognized medical term because everything falls under the umbrella of ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But it's a horrible, terrible name because most people do not identify with being hyperactive. So now the H does not just stand for hyperactivity, it also stands for hyperarousal. So those of you who just identify with being ADD are actually ADHD. Without the hyperactivity. Hyperarousal could mean that you have trouble sleeping, that you have multiple thoughts at one time, that you're restless, that you are hyper on the inside, even though you might be very calm and sometimes even introverted on the outside. ADHD. It's also a terrible name because attention is not deficit. Attention is just inconsistent. ADHDers are fantastic at hyper-focusing and getting things done that they're interested in. They just don't like doing things that are boring. Yeah, newsflash, we didn't know that, right? Hyperactivity actually only affects 1/3 of all ADHDers. That means 2/3 of you actually don't identify with being hyperactive or being ADHD like we used to know it at all. Another thing that's really important to point out about ADHD is that we used to think of this as a childhood disorder, someone who can't sit still in their chair or can't focus in school, when in fact, it's just as much a disorder of emotional dysregulation. In fact, 1/3 of all adults today say that RSD, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, is the most debilitating ADHD symptom that they experience. That means your emotions going up and down and up and down, but also being extremely sensitive to anyone giving you any kind of teasing, constructive criticism. Maybe you failed to meet their expectations or failed to meet your own, and that triggers an RSD episode. If I had to break apart ADHD into just two categories, I would sum it up to distractibility and emotional dysregulation. That does not mean that ADHD is not other things, but those are the biggest core symptoms of ADHD, not being able to focus and being distracted and not being able to manage your emotions. Something else that's really interesting about ADHD is we always thought of this as a childhood disorder. In fact, many years ago, we used to think that females couldn't even have ADHD. Now we know that ADHD actually is just as much an adult disorder as it is a childhood disorder. In fact, the average age of diagnosis today is 31 years old. That means that so many people are not being diagnosed. They're being missed because they either are willing to work twice as hard for half of the reward. They're just masking their way through life. Maybe they have some great gifts that are really helping them to excel in school, and so it's just being missed. It's overlooked in girls so often because of the hyperactivity features of ADHD. In fact, we do a terrible job at recognizing ADHD today because the DSM-5 right now has 18 behaviors that they look for, and ADHD is not just behavioral. In fact, most of ADHD lives in the brain. It's how we process information. It's what we think about the way that people are treating us or our hypersensitivity to the feeling that we're being left out or rejected. It's many times a lack of self-confidence. It's imposter syndrome. Did you know that by age 10, most ADHD children have heard over 20,000 corrective messages? This is so damaging to one's self-esteem, and it continues on throughout their life. This people-pleasing, worrying about whether or not they're fitting in, they're doing things correctly. Is somebody mad at them? In fact, we know that many ADHDers will morph into a people-pleasing pattern because they are so used to being corrected, to getting things wrong, to not being good enough. That, or we also see many ADHDers start to have a give-up mentality. They try something once, maybe twice, they're not very good at it, they're done with it forever. This isn't just their personality. We're not just born to give up or to be extremely sensitive and now want to please everybody. It's our wiring. And something that's really important when we're learning about ADHD is that we learn to separate the difference between who we are, our personality, our likes, our dislikes, what we're good at, from our wiring. They are not the same. Our wiring is just really a second neurological system that we were born with that's different than the neurotypical brain, that when used properly, when we have our own owner's manual for our unique wiring system, it works quite well. In fact, ADHDers tend to make amazing entrepreneurs. They're overachievers. They're incredibly brilliant, smart, creative. They find solutions to problems faster than the average person. They have a high IQ because the way their brain works is very unique. In fact, we have an acronym to help ADHDers really tap into what turns their brain on. NICUP, novelty, interest, challenge or competition, urgency or passion. And once one of those 5 things is ignited, watch out, because ADHDers can do practically anything they put their minds to once they believe that they can. Have you ever wondered if you have ADHD? Well, in some parts of the world, getting a diagnosis can take years. And let's be honest, most people in the US are pretty impatient about getting a diagnosis as well. So I created a short, research-based quiz to help you get clarity fast. Take it now for free at jherisouth.com or use the direct link in the description. Now, let's get back to the show. Does any of that sound like you? I bet it does. And that's why you're here. That's why we're going to be best friends. And that's why you should subscribe. My goal is to demystify anything that might be getting in the way of you living your best life. Just like my clients who felt that they were the problem, they couldn't get started, they couldn't get out of bed, they couldn't find their keys, and they were convinced that they were going to live this way forever until they realize that they have ADHD and they can create their own owner's manual so that they have steps to take to live their best life. That's what I want for you, and that's why we're doing this show. So here's my one tip of the day to help you deal with your ADHD today. ADHDers typically struggle with self-confidence because they are inconsistent. They don't trust themselves to show up when they say they will, to keep their commitments, because they haven't learned how to get their brain engaged all of the time. They're surprised when it kicks on and they are frustrated when it doesn't. One of the main things we want to do when we have ADHD is work on our self-confidence. And what's one of the best ways to work on self-confidence is to keep our commitments to ourselves. ADHDers are go big and go home, all or nothing mindset all the time. And we want to be more realistic in the goals that we set. I do not tell myself I'm going to wake up at 6 a.m. if I go to bed at 3 a.m. just because that's what time I want to wake up. I know that I'm going to fail. So when I'm being intentional about making goals, not only do I want to push myself, but I want to be realistic. Start by just giving yourself small, actionable, bite-sized pieces. Like maybe you don't make your bed every morning, but that's something you want to do. Then make a goal that you're going to make your bed every morning, because it's something you can do if you just are intentional about it. It's actually not about making the bed. It's about your brain keeping track of, yes, I kept my commitment to myself. I did it. You stand a little taller. You start to have a little bit more self-confidence. But also remember, don't force yourself to do things in the beginning that you absolutely hate to do, because we're dopamine chasers. One of the biggest mistakes I see ADHDers making is that they are in jobs they hate that don't complement the gifts that they have, and then they shame themselves for not being able to do the same job as everyone around them. Be aware of what your likes and dislikes are, what your talents are, and start making goals that align with the things you're good at or the things that you actually want to accomplish, that your brain will focus on wanting to get done. If we start with small goals and we prove to ourselves, look, I can show up. I actually can be consistent. I can follow through and do the things that I say I'm going to do. It will give us the confidence to propel ourselves to start hitting bigger goals and accomplishing bigger things. So, TLDR, start every morning by making your bed. It's not going to be life-changing. The money's not going to start pouring in. You're not going to be a completely different person. But it is going to give you self-confidence, and you're going to notice that you actually feel like you're capable of accomplishing more than you ever knew you could. So take that 47 seconds, make your bed, and pay attention to how you feel throughout the day. So you're great. You're awesome. You're a shining star. I love you. But what's more important is that you love you. Because remember that being you is the goal. I'm Jheri South, and this is South of Normal.